Good afternoon, this is Vahan Setien here with another video regarding Armenian history, the history of the Armenian people, what people know or they don't know about the Armenian history, and how their mindset has been enveloped around the history that they know of, whether they know anything, whether whatever they know is actually true or not. So for those who haven't heard me speak before, I'm an industrial psychologist. I have been on numerous videos, interviews on TV, and I'm also the author of The Enigma of the Armenian Alphabet, which I published a few months ago, which is a small booklet that is a sort of a introductory to the whole historicity of the Armenian people, in a sense, and also their alphabet, which was reintroduced by Mr. Mashtot. So I'm here to give a little bit of feedback and also to discuss about a psychological aspect of the human psyche, which what I have seen in various people when I had discussions with in relation to Armenian history is the inferiority complex. The inferiority complex can mean various things. It really has various dimensions, but the aspect that I want to talk about is when we present a historical fact, for example, to people about, particularly for Armenian history, because the Armenian history itself is very old. It is actually prehistoric, so for people to be surprised on what we find, and we continuously find that within the Armenian highland about the ancient people. People get surprised, they become skeptical even though it's a historical fact, and they rely on old theories, and they come forward with their own interpretation even though we have more solid historical facts to provide. So just because we have the evidence for it, some people still hang on to old convictions, and it's difficult to change their mind, even though we're not here to change anybody's mind. We're actually here to educate, for us to have them see the actuality of those evidences, and for even within the Armenians themselves especially, that I have seen, is that I see various aspects of inferiority complex, and it's difficult to fathom sometimes that the Armenians themselves don't believe some of the aspects of their own history, particularly Armenians who have lived in different countries for several generations. Those people have been provided with a foreign, you might say, perspective of Armenian history. So as time goes by, their mindset is fossilized into a certain perspective. So when new information is brought forth, they become a little skeptical, and they decide not to really pursue in learning more or anything about it. So that's one of the problems, and it's difficult to speak to those people in a normal conversation. For example, we have Armenians in other countries, in Iran, for example, in Greece, and where they have been exposed to Persian and Greek history, not realizing that some of the major aspects of those civilizations have been influenced by the Armenian culture, whether it was through language or artistry, music, language, various aspects of language, certain words that they use. So for them to open their horizon and realize what's at stake and what is true, they really have to be ready for that, and sometimes it requires time. It requires information to be given in small segments for them to digest it first. I would say the last 50 or 60 years, especially when science and its various disciplines have come about to really help unearth hidden history of the Armenian people, we see that some of the history that has been written is being rewritten based on new information that we find. You have the Europeans, for example, when initially they thought that the Stonehenge in England was old. Now they see that no, the Armenian Stonehenge is actually 4,000 or 5,000 years older than that. So if people are intellectually honest, they will have more open minds to gather this data and to understand it. For people who don't have the open mind, then it becomes a little bit difficult for us to provide truthful information and for them to digest it. So we have seen more and more people who are intellectually honest, who are ready to embrace ancient history without resorting to nationalism, without resorting to any bias, but they actually are there to really learn what hasn't been learned before, because you have to realize that we are not discovering new truths, we are rediscovering old ones. So we have to be prepared, especially in this age. We have to be open-minded. We have to let go of our convictions and really grasp what is being presented, whether it is reasonable, whether it is logical, whether it is scientifically based. Because if we have our own biases and if we are credulous people, we are superstitious, we are scared of changing our viewpoints based on certain psychological or physiological reasons, that becomes a problem for a person to really understand history. And that's the reason why when you see two different websites, for example, on Armenian history, provide different aspects of that, and which is sometimes contradictory and sometimes is irreconcilable, well, they really take their time to write whatever they have seen, and sometimes they use certain theories that has been debunked a very long time ago, and they just continue with the agenda, whatever the agenda is. Now you have the newer generation who is more exposed to the scientific disciplines and what they say about human history and the Armenian history and other new discoveries that we find everywhere. Whether it is a Egyptian letter or papyrus that we find, and where sometimes we see Armenian letters there, which is about 4,000 years ago. So, and then of course you have seen the pottery in Bolivia, which has certain Armenian letters on them, and some people determine that to be a coincidence, but it's really not if you really think about it. I mean, it's hardly a coincidence when you have an exact replica of the letters themselves, which are still being used in the Armenian language and the alphabet. So you really have to embrace what's really being presented, and that's where the inferiority complex comes in. You think that it is really not inferiority complex, but it really is if you really think about it, in a sense where you don't want to change any of your old convictions, or you have heard something from another person about the history of the Armenian people, and now you're trying to reconcile that with the new data. So I usually try to make people really read what is being presented in a more reasonable and scientific manner, as opposed to a pure assumption, which opens up for interpretation from different viewpoints. I mean, we have, you might say, professors within the United States and abroad, and they use old theories about Armenian people, where they have, for example, as I mentioned before, they came from other locations to their own lands, and that becomes irreconcilable when you consider the genetics, where you consider the continuum, including the evolution of the Armenian language and the alphabet. You see words that are being shared with different civilizations at different points in time that contains the same essence of the word and the way it sounds, what it means. So you have to really understand that when you look at the Armenian people, their ancestors were prehistoric as opposed to ancient. So you look at them and you realize that they have gone through various areas of the world, even before any civilization came about, or when they actually had the ability to write. So when you have Indian Rig Veda, for example, where they write about the Aryan invaders, for example, when they came to those lands, well, you have to consider the time gap between the time the Aryan or the Armenian Highlanders, when they came there, and the time where they actually wrote that stuff through oral tradition. So you have to realize that thousands of years have gone by. Words have changed and they have morphed into other words, although the essence have stayed the same. So as you embrace all this new information, whether through the internet, and also when it comes to the internet itself, you have to be careful on what you read, despite the fact that it has been repeated for hundreds of years. You have to consider what has been discovered recently, and compare that to what has been written in the website, and to see whether it makes sense or not. And you have to use a little bit of judgment. I mean, if they talk about an ancient artifact in modern day Turkey, for example, well, you're not going to say it's a Turkish artifact. It's just coincidentally Turkey is there. Same thing with Azerbaijan, for example. Whatever we find there, and consequently you see them even destroying ancient artifacts to hide the tracks of who the ancient people that were there before them. So be careful in trying to associate two different cities, countries, civilizations within the same time frame, because it's not going to make sense. Well, you can't compare, for example, the city of Troy with the current city of Istanbul, for example, and write the same, on the same map, two cities where they have coexisted. It just doesn't make sense. So be careful with anachronism. Be careful with trying to analyze provided information which really doesn't make sense from a historical standpoint, from the anthropological standpoint, from the genetics standpoint. And for you to realize all this, you really have to study the material. I mean, you can't just rely on what's being presented. You have even Armenian professors who talk about things that has been debunked a long time ago, and they don't realize that sometimes. Sometimes they just follow their own agenda. Sometimes they have their own curriculum, which has been developed 20 or 30 years ago, and they want to continue talking about that. So keep this in mind. I'll come out with another video regarding all this, but if you haven't visited my Facebook website, it's called The Historicity of the Armenian People from the Neolithic Era to the Present, which I provide small essays and excerpts from different psychological, historical, scientific disciplines, and I write about certain things that people didn't know of, certain symbols, certain words, certain aspects. So I will say goodbye at the moment, and then you will hear from me again. Thank you very much. Have a good